When I made a crafting video talking about my process for ROG, it was very well received. In fact, a lot of people wanted to see more crafting videos. Now, I want to start this one off with a little bit of a caveat and a warning. I went into the ward crafting relatively blind because I knew a lot about how to craft ES gear and kind of what I was going to be looking for. Also, because we're about 2 months into Arch Nemesis, I went into it with a somewhat greedy tilt. I wasn't going for just a usable item, something that I talk about several times. I was going for a very good item. These are two things that you should probably do differently from me if you're going to get into crafting. Unless, of course, you're in a situation like I am, where if I blew up 30x in my crafting and learned something from it, I'd be completely fine with that. And I was just doing this really for the learning process, more so than even to sell for profit, so that's why I felt very comfortable doing it. But with all that out of the way, here's going to be my crafting process for how I rolled the ward gear. I was looking specifically for high ward. As suffixes, things like resistance, intelligence, and dexterity were a plus, with potentially chaos resistance also being something of interest, and accuracy being a very bad stat. The reason I was aiming for these specific things is I was selling to Crystallized Omniscience ward loop builds that generally want stats, don't necessarily need resistances, but a few resistances could be helpful depending on what your Omniscience level is, and Chaos Res is good to a point. You don't want too much, but you also don't want too little. The crafting method that I was using was rolling the prefixes with dense fossils, and then fixing the suffixes with Eldritch Chaos. Now, you could do it the other way as well, where you roll the suffixes with, say, essences, and then fix the prefixes with Eldritch Chaos. But I felt for a lot of these higher-end items, it was a better idea to do it prefix and then fix suffix, than do it suffix and then fix prefix. So to start with, the use of the dense fossils on the various bases. Word gloves are relatively simple to roll. Ideally, you want as much word as possible, which is prefixes. So, you roll it with dense fossils, and you just need to look at the total ward value. Unfortunately, you can't craft any ward on, which makes it a little bit harder to roll than energy shield gear, but if you're going for a top tier item, that doesn't really matter as you wouldn't be using crafted ES anyway. To start with, I'm just going to take out a whole bunch of fossils here. I have 4 bases and I'm perfectly happy to spam them. I would suggest going about 5 at a time if you're doing this for personal use. If you're crafting for profit like me, or in this case crafting for the sake of demonstration, doing it a bunch of times is pretty helpful. And I'm only looking at that first number, that quality and then ward. I don't really care about anything else on the item. I can always fix that later. And I'm targeting around 400. These can get up to about 500, but 400 is where I'm going to start to say, all right, this is worth my time. This one's actually pretty close. It got 369. It could be divined a little higher. Still not worth it though. Now, if you're just doing this for yourself, you're just starting out, something like this could be divined up to 400. It would probably be worth your time. I'm looking for something quite a bit better. I have hundreds of fossils and resonators. I'm not too worried about stopping on the first thing that I get. That's kind of the point of doing this demonstration, since random variance in crafting will absolutely skew things if you stop too early. Here we go, 403, that's going to get put aside. I don't know if I'll actually keep it. It will probably depend on how much else I use up. 436, that's a pretty good one. We've got T1, T2, T5. The T5 is unfortunate, but it's still going to be very sellable. 376 is too low, 246 is too low, 258, 320. Just looking at that top number. This is going to go over here as a maybe. This is a definitely yes. Not hitting anything too interesting here. 418, all right. And it is T2, T4, T2. So this is kind of in the category of this one where it's really mediocre and it's not likely going to be worth it. This one is T4, T1, T2, slightly better. As you can see though, it's not that hard to get these. I have plenty of fossils and resonators left. I don't think it's really worth fixing the suffixes on these for me personally. I would very strongly advise, if you were just going to use these, if you were like, yeah, I just want good gloves, this is great entry level gear, and it was relatively inexpensive. I started with 60 fossils, and I've hit it 4 times in about 40. but I can do better. So I'm going to do better. This is where the costs are going to start to mount. One of the biggest sources of cost when it comes to crafting in Path of Exile is, surprisingly, greed. When you say, this item's good, I could sell this, I could make a profit, but I want better. Now here we go, 452, T1, T3, T3, that's something that's better, that's going to be put aside. 465 with T1 Dex and usable cold res, that's really good because I don't have to actually do anything to this item. This item is perfectly sellable as is. 465 word is great. It's T1, T1, T3, T2 Dex, and usable cold res. So that's a big winner right there. And then this one is the stubborn base that hit 490. T1, T1, T3. Also a really good base. The suffixes are not so good, but we can fix those later. So now I'm pretty happy with this one. This one's definitely getting saved. I am really happy with this one. This one's definitely getting saved. I'm not so sure about these though. I put them aside because they were decent, but this is the point where I'd want to price check them and see how good is, let's just say 450 word on gloves, assuming nothing else is on it. Because yes, you can craft and you can fix with suffixes and you can add a lot of value, but you can do that with a better base as well. And through the magic of video editing, I'm going to tell you that no, it isn't worth it. As a base item, this is only worth 2 to 3 exalts, which is not very good when you compare it against something like the 490 word gloves. Those, just as this base item, are worth more like 5 to 6 exalts, which I would say is worth the time, whereas 2 to 3 isn't. That's not that much more than the base cost. So these are both going to go back into the keep re-rolling. The reason this one doesn't get that treatment is it's already done crafting. I don't need to finish it, so it's a much lower investment. For 38, could be divined higher. It's not actually terrible, but it's not actually great either. This is going to be I put it aside and I think about it. I do have other bases to spam, which is why I'm not going to use up absolutely everything here. Greed to an extent is good, but being overly greedy is not good. Which is a tricky balance. At the end of the day, the only way to find that balance is a lot of practice. And for similar reasons, I'm going to check this. This could be bad. But again, it's not ultimately worth all that much. It's only a few exalts, and I know that might sound like a lot of money to most people. Remember though, we're talking about a few exalts just to make these items because we're investing in very high quality bases, rolling to 30% quality or close to it, etc. So you don't really want to make a slight profit. You want to make a few exalts profit to justify your time and to justify the risk. This is a very unfortunate item, but it could be a lot better. And this is where it might be worth stopping. Again, if you're doing it for yourself, you could divine this significantly higher, but in the name of profit, we roll over and hope for something higher. And in this case, by hope for higher, I mean we'll roll higher deterministically over time. I guess it's not necessarily deterministically, just law of probability. It says if you try something a couple hundred times and the odds aren't that bad, eventually you're gonna hit the thing that you want. And I'm just gonna load all of these up since I have other bases. 434, T1, T1. This is an interesting one because this could be really, really, really good. At the moment though, it's only okay. And so I'm going to take a gamble here. I'm going to go over to my currency tab. I'm going to influence it with the Searing Exarch. And then I'm going to use an Eldritch Exalt. I hit maximum life. But it's okay, we can hit the undo button. And we destroyed it. Oh well, back to the drawing board. That's the sort of thing where, again, I would have been happy to use it if I was just rolling for myself. But I'm being greedy here, and I'm demonstrating, and I'm crafting for profit. I feel like I have to keep reminding people of this because the big mistake that I see people make with crafting is they try to copy greedy crafting. Do as I say, not as I'm doing here. In part, I'm doing this for the sake of demonstration. And also, I have 228 Exalt sitting here. If I lose a little bit because I was greedy on a craft, it's not going to negatively impact me. All right, nothing too impressive so far. Back to the fossil tab. Pull out more of these. I've used roughly half of my fossils, I believe, which about was my goal. And I'm really looking for something that's in that 450 range, because that's where the best items are going to be. That's where the most money's going to be. 388 is too low. In theory, I could be checking these to see if they could be divined, but I hit 482, so I don't need to. This is going to be a really good item. It's only T1, T2, T3, which shows you how insane the upper bound is, but that's where I'm going to call it here for these, at least for the fossil rolling. So here I have my helmet bases. They're 29 and 30 quality. On helmets, again, I'm just going to look at that ES number. I think that I need to aim for 500 or 600. I haven't rolled these helmets before, so I'm not entirely familiar, but 431 is certainly way too low, given that the tiers involved are really minimal. You can see that if the tiers of the item are 4 and 5, it's going to be too common and not that valuable. And the fact that I'm rolling 400 to 500 consistently kind of confirms that. But I'm checking the tiers of the item because if I rolled all tier 1 and just underestimated it, I'd lose a lot of money. So just having quickly rolled a few of these, I do think that I'm only going to stop if it says 600 or higher, because that seems to be where the numbers start to get less frequent. If I'm constantly rolling 400 to 500, then that's not really going to be something that valuable. And again, here it's almost 600 and it's got T1, which is good, T1, which is good, and then a trash tier 5. This is where the fact that you can't craft on it really comes into play, because if you could craft on it, that's where you'd be doing it. You'd be trying to annul that trash mod and replace it with, ideally, a better crafted mod. This is a little bit of a journey of discovery for me as well, because I got a lot of really high numbers early on, and now they're not rolling quite as well, which is interesting. I don't know if that means I overestimated how high it can go, or if I just haven't rolled it enough. Minion gems. I don't think that adds any value, unfortunately, which is a shame because everything else is really nice. In fact, because it's T2, T2, we're going to take a classic gamble of annulling it. Ooh, we hit it. And I appear to be out of Eldritch Exalts, so I'm just going to go quickly try to buy some. All right, I'm back due to the magic of editing. I now have these, and 604. All right, that's T2, T2, T5, which is pretty decent, and it has intelligence on it, which means it should be easier to finish or just sell as is. So this is going to be the first finished item, or at the very least, the first item that I set aside. I'll just make room for it over here so I don't accidentally roll over it. I think a lot of people, ooh, very nice, and I even got T1. That's a very nice item. That's definitely getting set aside too. I think a lot of people really underestimate the value of throwing annuls and or eldritch currency at an item. You can very often massively increase the value of something that was almost okay, and I've now very quickly hit 600 to 700 on everything, which is a little bit concerning because I have all this other currency and little to nothing to do with it. We'll see though, maybe it's worth rolling over one of these. This is where we use the magic of editing to price check something and I will let you know if I'm rolling over this, or maybe, unfortunately, even if I roll over this, because 604 is not looking very good when I hit 720 and 697. And sure enough, these are not particularly valuable. Even with the intelligence, this is just a little bit too low compared to what you can roll with the 700 plus. That 700 plus base is absolutely worth keeping. The 600-ish plus, with the intelligence, I could maybe sell it. I could maybe divine it up because it is T2, T2, but it's T2, T2, T5. And I have all these resources, so you win some, you lose some, you try some again, maybe. I think that's what I'm going to go with here, rather than divining them and seeing if I can sell. Again, if you were just looking to use it for yourself, I very much would not advise doing this. In fact, if you're on a budget and looking to profit as much as possible, I still wouldn't advise it because I guarantee you could have sold both of those for reasonable profits. But I'm not looking for reasonable profits. I'm looking to 5x or 10x my money. I'm looking for the greedy, near perfect item crafting because it's late in the league and it gives me a reason to continue to demonstrate this. To kind of give my thought process on why I'm doing something or why I'm not doing something. $729, all right. T1, T1, T2, perfect, perfect, perfect. After doing all the gloves, it is weird to me to see 500 and just be like, nope, that's not worth your time. Just roll over at 10. It's an instinct of mine to stop rolling every time I see that number 500. I'm sure as I make more of these, I'll break that habit. So close, but so far. If this hits something good, it could be worth it. We'll take the gamble. Sadly, did not hit anything good. $646. I'm going to say that that is acceptable since it's all T2s and it can be divined for a decent bit more value. It's not quite going to be as good, but I think it's good enough. You know what? I still have almost 40. Nah, we're going max greed. Again, do as I say, stop on stuff like that, don't do as I do, and just roll over it casually because you can. Unless, of course, you have a lot of money and you're more worried about only selling the best of the best, and not as worried about how much it might cost you to make some of those items. In which case, absolutely do exactly what I am doing. Because at the end of the day, I know that the 3 helmets and 4 gloves that I've made will easily cover all of my costs, whether I'm straight up deleting currency here by being greedy, or whether I'm actually standing a reasonable likelihood of benefiting. It doesn't really matter, because I will already have that profit in the bank. My hope is that I stand a reasonable likelihood of benefiting, though. That's always the hope. So let's see if we can delete the minion gems. And slam ward? Nope. It really likes slamming life, unfortunately, which normally might be very helpful, but here is not. Now here we go. That's the word we were looking for. T5 sadly, but this is going to hit around 700, especially when it's divined up. That 88 can go to 99. So this is where I stop being greedy and I call it good. Now that I've used all the dense fossils on the various bases, I've rolled a bunch of things with good prefixes and, in a couple cases, fairly okay suffixes. From here, I'm going to talk through the process that I used for finishing the suffixes, using again Eldritch Chaos, Exalts, and Annuls. Now it's time to start finishing the gloves. This won't include divining them, but this will include fixing the suffixes. Now, in the case of one pair of gloves, this one right here, the Horror Nails, they're already finished, so I don't need to do anything with the suffixes. I will need to add implicits, but that'll be in a slightly later step. In terms of the others, this has a lot of junk suffixes. That'll need fixing. This has junk suffixes, and this has junk suffixes, although they're slightly better here. So this one, I could maybe get away with a cheeky Eldritch Annul. I'm going to use a Greater Ichor here because I did already apply an Ember. I already hit the exposure, which is really nice because that's what the item's going to want eventually. But really, I just want to be able to annul a suffix without damaging the prefixes. So we're now going to try that. And unfortunately, I took off the only good thing. So I'm going to start rolling with Eldritch Chaos. I hit double T1. I mean, sometimes you're lucky, I guess, because that's absolutely done in terms of the suffixes. It took 1 Annul and 1 Chaos. That was the Morbid Talons, which might have had a different name originally, as I believe that does reforge the item. So next up, this one, I don't need a good Ember, I don't need a good Ichor, I just need something for the suffixes so that I can reroll it without damaging those nice word prefixes. The goal here is to get something a word loop build will want. Resistances are good, attack speed doesn't do anything, accuracy doesn't do anything, dexterity is very good, and chaos res could be good, but I don't think is in very much demand. Life regen could be good, but again, isn't really in demand. Here I've got a little bit of dex, that's pretty good. A little bit of lightning res, fire res, it's a mediocre item. One that potentially would be usable, but I think I can do better, especially since this is the 490 word base. So I want something that's really going to add value. There we go. T1, so that's after 5 chaos used, and I'm going to try to exalt it. But before I do, I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to block something that's garbage that I don't want to roll. I can block either accuracy or attack speed, and accuracy has more tiers. This is a very important part of a crafting process. You will waste a lot of extra money if you don't do this. I hit rarity, unfortunately. That's really useless. So now I'm going to go over, remove crafted mod, because I don't need to waste an annul on this. If it keeps the lightning res, I'm good. And it didn't. So back to the drawing board. All right, I hit something good right off the bat. Not quite as good, but good enough to go off of. And it's just a matter of rinse and repeat from here until I hit suffixes that I'm happy with. Cold res, I mean, it's not terrible, but again, this is the one where I think it's worth getting greedy. And this will add a significant amount to the price. These are 1/5 of an exalt each. So every time I do this, I am spending a significant amount of money. That's why I would not be doing this for every single base. I would only be doing it for the very best of bases. The others, like this one here, 438, if I hit remotely decent suffixes, I'm just going to call it good. Life regen, nope, not good enough. I've had a 100% success rate of annulling the mod I want to keep so far. That's actually kind of impressive. This is where things get really, really pricey. As you can see, I've already spent something like 4 exalts just spamming this. And it's kind of deceptive how fast you go through that money. So do be careful that you don't overspend. Ooh, it's not perfect, but you know what? T4 Dex, T4 Res on this base, I am happy with that. And again, I spent over 4 exalts in Eldritch Chaos alone, so do be mindful of that and don't let those costs run away from you. This base, on the other hand, I'm going to influence it, and I'm going to look for anything even remotely decent. 34 Dex, that's a good start. I'll slam it. Chaos Res, that's a little too bad. Attack speed's useless. Fire Res, all right, that's worth a slam. Accuracy is unfortunately useless. I forgot to block there. That was my mistake. See, I'm going fast here rather than paying attention. 44 Fire Res. This time I will block the stupid accuracy. Cold Res, there we go. That's plenty good enough. Now it is time to finish the suffixes for all of these. To start with, I'm just going to use an Ichor on everything because I'm going to be messing with suffixes. Again, I need to use a slightly higher tier one on this one. So the higher level, or I guess higher ward ones in this case, will get the better suffixes. Now for suffixes, what am I looking for? Ideally intelligence, beyond that, resistance. Resistance is going to be the main thing that most people want. So here we go, it's intelligence, it's resistance, there's an open suffix for a crafted mod. I'm a little less experienced with the helmets than I was with the gloves, but I'm going to assume that that's sellable enough that I don't have to roll over it further. Now this one, I'm not actually going to use a chaos. Instead, I'm going to use a blocking technique. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to craft low tier accuracy. Because accuracy is something that you don't want on this. This is not an attack build. I'm going to slam it. Life regen. See, I'm not experienced enough to know if that is a strict detriment or not, so I'm just going to hold on to that for now, and I will see how the rest roll. Here we go. Cold Res, definitely block and slam there. The main reason for blocking and slamming is this is expensive, and we're being a little more currency efficient. Low tier int, not super good, but I'll leave it for now. There's going to be more experimentation here. Like, this could be good enough to sell as is. It's 697. It can be divined higher. I'm going to try gambling a little bit and seeing what rolls. After all, I don't want to use a ton of money, but I think I've increased the value at a reasonable cost here. At least assuming that this hits anything usable and I don't misclick. Oh, I did not pay attention to the fact that I rolled stun block recovery. So that was a slight mistake, but that's why I'm doing it in this format rather than a fully finished, polished video. I will edit down some to remove some mistakes that I'm going to leave in. Luckily, I did correctly annul it. And so now I can actually block like so and slam life regen. I don't think that's worth it. So let's see if it survives again. It is sometimes amazing how many times you can annul and slam an item with just preserving that mod and winning that coin flip. Then other times, 3-4 times in a row, you'll annul off the thing you want to keep. Well, there we go. That one's definitely done. That's in the definitely done, ready for crafting, divining implicits. This is in the maybe done, but all things considered, I don't think it's looking that amazing now with only 29 int and only 41 cold res. All right, so that one's definitely done. I've got these left, and I'm tempted to be greedy. By being greedy, what I mean is I want to try rolling them a little bit more and see if I can hit either higher tier int or higher tier res. One thing to keep in mind, this is where it gets expensive. I definitely would be better off if I was trying to save money, just keeping this as is and not risking the annul, because I can hit that. And now I need to redo the suffixes. But so far, it seemed like the suffixes are rolling pretty favorably, pretty consistently. So that's why I'm willing to take the risk. And also, I'm spending the money so that you don't have to. There's going to be a lot of this little dance of add a blocking craft, block something, slam, remove the blocking craft, annul. These are worth way too much money to just risk. And 20 is too low. Did it really? Oh no, that's stun block, of course. Rarity of items and life regen. I don't think it's worth saving, because I'd have to hit 2 annuls on that. This is where we risk spending way too much money by being greedy. But also there's this, which is good enough that I don't think I even risk an annul. I think I call this done, because that is T1 intelligence and a decent resistance. So that's definitely staying as is. Which helps to put into a little bit of context, where this is probably not as good, and this, based on how things have been rolling, might be okay. I'd say this is the absolute minimum, and it's on a 729 base, so it should sell pretty well. This might need a little more help. So I'm actually going to try to annul that low tier int and hit something better. Again, this is a little bit on the greedy side, but I think it's worth it just based on the rolls that I've done so far and how I know items tend to behave. Oh, there we go. See, that's much, much better. That'll help it out. Now I just have to land the slam. Reduced attribute requirements. That's not it. And I know it can be easy to watch me spend most of my currency here. I just want to remind you that if you're on any sort of budget, if you don't have this large stack of exalts just sitting there and quite honestly nothing to do with them at this point in the league, you shouldn't, no, I shouldn't have done that. That's just a waste of money, but whatever. You shouldn't be doing it this way. You should be doing it more efficiently. Chaos Res. Low tier Chaos Res, I don't know how much that improves it. I have seen a few people using Chaos Res. I've also seen people avoiding Chaos Res. I'm going to keep it. I'm not sure this is the correct call, though. I'm curious if this sells, and if so, for how much. That is why I'm keeping it, so this is kind of a science experiment. And finally, now that I've rolled all these items, I've fixed both the prefixes and the suffixes. I'm going to add the implicits using Ichors and Embers. This is really just an icing on the cake step rather than something that's particularly important. After all, you just kind of click an Ichor or click an Ember until you get what you want, and then you're good to go. Now, for the last part, I'm going to finish the gloves with a craft. So I'm just going to come over here. Most of these builds deal elemental damage. I'm going to put that on. Depending on the ES values, you may want to divine it. I'm not really going to have a tutorial for divining the item because it's kind of just you click. This one doesn't need it. All the rolls are nearly perfect, so that's good. But I'm going to fix the implicits. I'm only going to do this once because the implicits will be the same for all of the gloves. you're trying to get a nerve with your embers. So you can just put in a nerve. There's a couple other options that are okay. You could also just ignore what's rolling and just wait for it to light up. Exactly like that. It took about 30, and now exposure for cold res. I hit it, unfortunately not for cold. I don't think there's a great way to do cold exposure. I guess I think I can do... If I put cold exposure in parentheses, I believe that works. Yes, it does. Okay, so never mind. I can do something, and I'm just going to spam this until it lights up. Like so. There we have it. These are finished 490 word gloves. They have dexterity, they have resistance, they have cold exposure and unnerve, and they're going to be very valuable to someone playing a word loop build. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing for all the other pairs of gloves. Other things that you can craft are resistances and intelligence. Intelligence is an attribute. A lot of these use crystallized omniscience, therefore it's very valuable. But increased damage is also a valuable suffix, so if you're making multiple pairs, just play around and see which one fits best. You could also experiment a little bit with the market and do something like unnerve wither expiration, or unnerve and then expose fire, unnerve and expose lightning, as there are some people playing different variants. By far though, the cold is the most common, so for most items you're going to want to go cold res. There's things like freezes you inflict spread that also have some value. Again, I'm just going as generic as possible so that as many people as possible will see the item and try to buy it. Now again, I'm going to fix implicits on the item just as an example. Unfortunately, unlike before, it doesn't seem to be nearly as universal. There's a lot of different ways that people are building these in terms of their implicits. So I have to pay a little bit more attention. I can't just roll until one thing. For example, crit chance for spells has been fairly popular and has come up quite a bit. Also, Fizz damage taken recouped is by far the most popular. So since this is a fairly good item, I'm going to try to aim for that. I keep hitting lightning recoup, unfortunately. Fire recoup, that doesn't help. Chaos recoup, I believe would, because you're also self-damaging with Forbidden Rite. But Fizz recoup is by far the best option here, just based on popularity. However, for a more mediocre helmet, I could easily go with crit chance for spells, which does seem to be quite common. There we go, Fizz recoup. And duration of ailments is not a popular one. Cold pen is quite popular, as is mana reservation efficiency, but I believe mana reservation efficiency might be Searing Exarch rather than Eater of Worlds. Never mind, I lied. It is Eater of Worlds. And so that's an example of a fairly popular combo that I think is perfectly sellable, and an example of how you'd fix the implicits. From here, all I'd need to do is see if it needs to be divined, and in this case, I do think it does, just because that 91 to 99 of a ward, even though the rest is already pretty good. So now 710, that went down, 701, that went down, 700, 721, not quite where I want it to be. I'm aiming for about 730 because this is a really top tier item. And there we go. Not quite where I wanted it, but 728 is probably close enough. Maybe I price check, maybe I deal with rolling that again later. Overall, this is in a good spot now, and this is a finished item that I can put up for sale. Now that I've finished making 8 items and fully finishing them, I'm going to do a little bit of a breakdown of both the costs and also the profits that I made, as of 4 days after I made all the gear. This data is going to be probably about a week old by the time the video actually goes live, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the time frame, and to preface the fact that prices may have shifted since I made this. But first, if you found this insight into my crafting process to be helpful, then please do leave a like on the video, as it really helps me out in the YouTube algorithm. If you want to see more crafting videos like this, then let me know down in the comments below what sort of crafting you'd like to see, and be sure to sub to the channel, then ring the bell to be notified whenever I upload that video. And finally, if you want to see a written summary of this video while also supporting me, you can do so over on my Patreon by becoming a patron of a $5 level. For $5 a month, you'll get access to various written versions of video scripts and or guides that I make. The information won't be any different from what's presented here, but for a long time people asked me for a written form, something that they could go through at their own pace. And so if that's something you're looking for, it's over on Patreon. But for now, let's start looking at the costs and breakdowns. To start with, I purchased 2 runic crowns and 2 runic gauntlets. They were 100% base perfection, item level 84+. The runic crowns cost me 4 exalts, and the runic gauntlets cost me 3.5, for 7.5x total. From there, I bought 4 split beasts for 224 chaos, and I used some perfect fossils and resonators to raise the quality to around 30%. This added 2.33x to the cost, or we can round everything up to about 10x total to this point. Now from there, I rolled them with dense fossils. I used around 250 dense fossils, which cost 4.4x as of the time of making this video. In finishing the items, I used 44 Eldritch Chaos, 13 Eldritch Annul, 17 Eldritch Exalt, 47 Divine Orbs, which was probably me being a little greedier than I should have been, 200 Embers, and 250 Ichors, for a total price of about 16 Exalts. Which means if you factor everything together, I spent about 30 exalts creating the items that you see here in the video. It should be noted I did reroll one of the helmets after making this video about a day later when I realized it wasn't selling and the reason was the suffixes weren't good enough, so add on about an X cost or 31 total. I spent around 31x to make 8 items or a little bit under 4 exalts per item. Originally, I had a very ambitious goal of trying to 5x or 10x my investment. On the gloves, I didn't really hit that. I was looking at more like 2 to 3x my investment. Whereas on the helmets, in a lot of cases, I did actually hit that somewhat ridiculous goal, with the best one selling for 25 exalts. So as of the time of making this video, 3 out of the 4 helmets and 2 out of the 4 gloves sold for a total of 66 exalted orbs. The Blood Veil Runic Crown, which had 730 ES, 60 Int, and 35 Res, sold for 15 exalts. The Rune Shelter, which was about the same, with a little bit more Res and a slightly different stat distribution, sold for 10 exalts. The Mind Salvation, the 753 ward helmet, ended up with 50 Int and 80 Res, and it sold for 25 exalts. This is the one that I redid, and it was absolutely worth it. That was that really big greedy item that I was hoping to sell. From there, in terms of the gloves, the Dusk Fist, 490 ward, 40 dex, 30 res. I was asking 8.5x, someone offered me 8, and I took that offer. And Foe Hold, 450 ward with 80 res. I was asking 7.9, and I sold it for 7.9. It was a significant currency investment to make all of these items. But in terms of actual time spent crafting them, I only spent a little over an hour, and that was with some kind of poor preparation, not buying enough materials, and having to segment off and record costs for the purposes of this video. So if we look at pure time investment, one could argue that I made close to 36x in 1 hour in profit. In fact, I probably would have made 30x an hour in profit if I hadn't taken the time to record all this information and just gone at it. But that might be a little bit disingenuous because I also took several days to sell the items afterwards, and I do have 1 helmet and 2 gloves as of the time of the recording here that were unsold. If I approach this from a should you craft for profit here, I'd say no. Ward Loop is a very specific build, there aren't a ton of people playing it, and the market could dry up or get overflooded very easily. On the other hand, if you're playing Ward Loop, or if you're playing any future build that uses Ward, and you want to know how to craft this, about how much it'll cost, and what you should do, when you should be annulling, when you should be greedy, or when you shouldn't be greedy, then I do think this video will serve as a good guideline for that. But I hope you found it helpful. If you try any word crafting projects of your own, let me know how much it cost you, and what the item ends up being worth if you use it for yourself, or what it ends up selling for if you're just doing it for profit. And also, as a quick reminder, feel free to let me know of any other crafting topics that you'd like to see. I can't guarantee everyone will make it into a video, but there's always a chance, and the more people that ask for it, the more likely it's going to be. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the comments below, or join the Discord, where you can ask questions, get build help, and hang out with the community. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. They're awesome, and they get to show it by having their name on screen in the credits of all my videos. So if you want to see your name here, be sure to check the link in the description. For more general gaming content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, and if you want a water bottle or a cool shirt, I have a link to my official merch shop in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.